each tribe had its senior druids in, say, Gaul here. And then there were nationally important gathering places. So the Carnutes, one of the tribes of Gaul, their centre was Chartres, what became Chartres. That was a big Celtic oppidum, and that's where the Druid Council of all Gaul would meet. They would discuss, you know, matters of interest. And the Parisi in Paris, they had their own druids. I think they've just made some archaeological discoveries at Notre Dame under the thing, because that was originally a Druid temple, Notre Dame. So there's a lot still to discover about Gaul and Druidry. We know that they had, in Brittany and off the coast, sacred islands where prophetesses would live. So Druid seers, because as a Druid you could specialise. Some became doctors, like herbalists, medical doctors, and they would spend their life perfecting their knowledge of herbs and stuff, and healing, including quite advanced surgery, and psychiatry and mental health issues. You know, we know from the texts in Ireland and stuff that the Druids they had an equivalent of a National Health Service. You would be treated free by them. And they in turn would receive support from the community. So the healer Druids were important. Then there were the legal Druids who were giving remedies in courts. All the knowledge was mentally reserved. It wasn't written down. They must have, well, like all oral people, they had brilliant memories. Then there were the historian Druids who remembered the past kings, the past glories, the past battles, and the past epic history of Ireland or Gaul or Britain. And then there were the bards who would put all that into song. So as a Druid, you were also expected to be a bard and put it into poetry or song, because you know, long winter nights, no Netflix, in the hall, what are you going to do? You're going to listen to the bard telling the stories, the love stories, the hero stories, etc., etc. And they use satire as well. So a Druid bard, annoyed with a bad king, would just use a satirical poem, and that would be the end of him. He would make up a satirical poem about whoever, Trump or Putin, and then he would be too ashamed to go on in office. So they had the power of the word. One of the deities, Ogma, or Ogmios, who was the Druid deity of sound and language, the Ogham, which was their kind of alphabet of trees, was, the Greeks likened him to Hercules, but it's not quite a good match. But anyway, he used oratory and rhetoric and speaking and the power of the words to, you know, to control events. So the point of Druidry is to steer the community in the direction of goodness and well-being and happiness. The word Druid, the etymology is connected to Dharma. So in Sanskrit, which is a related language to the Celtic languages, Dharma means the ultimate truth. It's that which is eternally enduring. The Dharmic body of the Buddha is still here in this room, the Dharmakaya. It's eternal. And as a Druid, one has to see the Dharma in any given situation. And from that, you can then do justice, you know. So the Druvid, the seeing bit, is the vid, which is videre, to see. The root of the term idea, as well in Greek. So this was all discovered by a very important Druid, because I'm sort of, in my Encyclopedia of Druid Studies, I've gone into all different levels of Druids, right? So some were, you know, the herbalists, the healers, but they're also the scientists and the intellectuals, if you want. They were the intelligentsia of the Celtic people. And they've remained so. So they haven't gone away. What I discovered when I moved to Britain from Canada in the early 80s and I met living Druids who were from Ireland and Scotland and Wales, and there was a council meeting, and I was invited to go and meet them and join the council. And I realised they're not just in storybooks or myths, they're living Druids. Part of the occult revival of 19th century Britain, the Golden Dawn and things like this. Yeats was one of them. A chap called A.E. who was a poet in Ireland. And there's a magical tradition in British literature that people like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis embody. And that's very druidical, because they work with nature and the forces of nature. So their fundamental thing was to create peace and maintain peace and balance in the community. Now, what do you do when the Roman army invades and Caesar's leading 10,000 men, That's a problem for the non-violent approach. And there was a lot of discussion here in Gaul, what do we do? Eventually Vercingetorix was declared the Druid warrior leader, and he was given the authority to lead the defence. And he did defeat Caesar in a couple of battles, but eventually he lost. And he was captured and taken in chains to Rome. But I think from a Druid perspective, the irony is that the Roman Empire, which became very corrupt, itself succumbed to a Palestinian Druid, Jesus, who we regard as an equivalent of a Druid seer, a man of Dharma, a man of truth. And his simple words of wisdom ultimately conquered the militarism and violence of the Roman Empire through peace. So I think that's why a lot of the Druids in Gaul and France and Britain and Ireland accepted Christ's teachings as building on and confirming what they had been doing. This is all in my encyclopedia. Going back to what I was saying about the intelligentsia, so a lot of these Christian Druids, we call them now, it's very interesting in Ireland, you see it clearly, because they were incredibly interested in education, scholarship, learning, the Irish, in ancient times, and the different grades you could reach. And then that was all transferred into the early Irish monasteries to train as a priest or a sage in Ireland, to study the Bible, to study the Psalms. But they also wanted you to learn the old poetry, the old myths, the Druid stories. And it was in the Irish monasteries that they kept alive this knowledge and eventually wrote it down. That's why we know the ancient history of Druid Ireland and the gods. Because for them, there's a seamless interconnection between ancient times and modern times. One of my favourite modern day Druids is a chap called Sir William Jones, who was a Welshman. I lived in Wales for 10 years, and that's where I really got into studying Druidry, learning a bit of Welsh. His father was a mathematician and a friend of Sir Isaac Newton, very unbelievably, intelligent people. And his son, Sir William, was sent to Oxford University to study as a teenager. And he mastered loads of languages like Persian, Greek, Latin, but also Arabic and all kinds of languages. And then he also did a law degree. So he became the head of the, in Calcutta, he was appointed head of the British Raj in its law department. So he was the chief judge of Calcutta, which was then in Bengal, which was the main centre of the British in India in the late 1700s. He also spoke Welsh, and he'd written poetry in Welsh about Druidry and stuff. When he got to India, he learned Sanskrit. He asked the Brahmins to come in and teach him Sanskrit, which he learned. And he recognised that the Sanskrit, the Welsh, the Latin, the Greek were all interconnected. And he coined this idea of the Indo-European languages. And it was like a light bulb moment when he realised that these Indian sages and their Brahmins and their teachings of non-violence and Vedanta is the same as the ancient Welsh Druids. It's the same metaphysics. The Druids had their own pantheon of gods, which represent the different archetypes, of male and female energies and so on, like the tarot of the gods I've done. But ultimately, they all come from spirit. There's a spiritual essence, Brahma, if you want, that invigorates them all. Anyway, this guy, Sir William Jones, wrote a huge poem about the Hindu and the Druid gods and goddesses now making peace. His vision was that he was a world-centric thinker, So that, to me, that's what Druids stand for. We're world-centric thinkers who, in the given tribe where you are situated, you are bearing witness to the bigger planet, so that people make their decisions about their lives from a cosmic perspective. Because beyond world-centric is cosmocentric. And one of the great Welsh Druidesses gods is Arianrhod, which means the silver wheel. And it's thought to be the constellations of the stars. She's from the celestial realms. And I once went to a Druid camp in Ireland, and I was shown a mountain, and it was said in the ancient Irish Druid legends, that's where the ancestors of the Druids came from outer space. They came onto that mountain, like thousands of years ago. Yes. So anyway, why does it matter? Well, I still think the witness of peace and the linkage of place, the sacredness of the land, the animals, the trees, the plants, is still necessary for our time. We shouldn't overlook ecology. And the Druids love nature. We have bodies, we have physical form. But we are also cosmic awareness as well. And so we have duties to all realms, That's the function of us as human beings. We should be upholding that, the beauty of creation, really, and not spoiling it by defacing it, by killing and slaughtering and wounding and harming. That's where love and non-violence comes in. So anyway, that's my little take on Druidry. That's summing up 30 years of study. Any questions? And that's why we celebrate the rebirth of the sun coming back.
Well, an idea come about the fact of singing. Myself, I feel sometimes isolated in the place I live.
Yeah.
And also the nature is not something as important as in ancient time, because when I need some food, I don't have to hunt, I don't have to raise the food, I just go to the supermarket or on the market and I get it. So the human being is looks like it's changing, and the question as the place of work nowadays with the machines, we could buy stuff we don't need to make them. And also a way of singing is inner joy expressing itself. And before finding peace, I would like to recover that. As a Druid, what would you say to that modern question?
Yes, that sort of came up in the meeting on Friday, how these different things co-interrelate, and there was an agreement that joy is very, very important. That kind of wisdom is the highest energy we should activate, and then joy and love, and then peace comes from that. So peace is the fruit. But going back to music, yes, I mean, that's why I'm also a musician and why I love to compose and play and have a piano and guitar and harp. And we're going to have a music club over Christmas sometime. Yes, I'm also a bard, and I think one should encourage that. If my daughter was here, I'm sure she would try and start a singing group in the local church. We can meet once a month and, do some songs, Teze songs or something, because it's got good acoustics in the church. And Apollo is the lord of music, and Apollo was accepted by the Celtic tribes of Gaul as equivalent to Luch, who's our god of light. But music's very important, and when I lived in Britain, I gave some talks at Druid conferences and met people who were working with choirs. There's a tradition in Britain of, at any one time there was a perpetual choir. At any one time in Britain there would always be a choir singing somewhere in the land. And in some of the earliest poetry in Old Welsh is called the triads, meaning three things, because three is the sacred number of the Druids. So the triads of Britain are the oldest poetry. And one of the triads is the three perpetual choirs of Britain were Glastonbury, St David's, and somewhere else. So and the tradition was one of them would be always going on at any time of day or night, all days of the year. And I love that idea that someone somewhere there's a choir singing.
Excuse me, I do not understand very well the word choir.
C'est une conglomération des peuples qui chantent à l'église officiellement pour les services.
Une chorale.
Une chorale.
Ah, ok.
Ok, c'est une chorale. Ok. Oui. Il y avait 3 chorales perpétuelles au Bretagne. À chaque moment, il y a une chorale quelque part. And so I said, let's revive that. And let's get, because there's choirs in most towns in Britain, often associated with the church, but not always. Sometimes just for fun. My daughter was in a choir. I said, why don't we get a choir from every city in Britain to join a network of perpetual choirs so that we know that somewhere at one time there's one of them is on duty, from the north of Scotland right down to Cornwall. I still would love to see this come true, this vision, to revive the perpetual choirs. But in Europe, we in France, so that's, I agree, let's get the singing back.
Even without the singing, for example, my neighbor, his name is Christian. He has a very nice name,
Okay.
but I often hear him like a bird.
He's whistling.
Whistling. It's wonderful.
Right.
You cannot see somebody whistling when he's not in joy.
Yes. No, I agree. I wrote in my book on wisdom affairs, I proposed a new model for instead of terrorism, I proposed we develop what I call joyism.
Ah, yes, I remember that.
So this is a new word I've coined. It's in my dictionary of new words. And I think the word terrorism is a problem for humanity. Everyone's afraid of everyone else and we're all in terror. Well, we've got to turn the page, and we need a new era of joy. Music's part of that. All the things the Druids stood for are still valid for a new era of joy. But there's an eternal dharma within all the boxes. Not everyone needs to be a Druid or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian. We can all be the wisdom of all of them. Yeah. Bonjour. Okay, come in. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, mind that one. It might pull the. So it'd be better if one of you sits here. Don't
okay.
use the red chair,
All right.
if that's okay.
I'll only
Yeah.
stay for a moment.
Hello?
Thank you.
Okay. This one is fine, Hava. Yeah. Ah. Did you come together or just met outside?
Well, I already knew Noah, and by accident, Noah had a bike problem,
A spare one. Ah.
so he came by our house, and I'm dropping him.
Okay.
I'm dropping him off.
Driving.
Yeah.
Oh, you're giving them a lift. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Where are you? Where do you live in the village? Are you here somewhere?
In Clunia.
In Clunia.
Yeah.
Ah. Well, bienvenue.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So we've just been, we're in the middle of the philosophy club, which
Yeah.
we do every week, and I'll do it in English if that's okay.
That's
Is that
very
all
good
right?
for me.
Yeah. We were just going through this periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions, which we do each week. We've just heard what Druids are, because Armel asked. We choose different ones, and I was just explaining, so I won't repeat it all. It was quite
Please just go ahead
extensive.
like you were doing. Thank
But
you.
I'll do the next one, which is the one I was going to do, is Norse and Germanic traditions, number 22. Okay. And you're both from Dutch origin, aren't you?
Yeah.
I think. So that's quite good. Well done. Good synchronistic timing there. Because the Dutch are from these traditions.
Yeah.
So, and I'm partly Anglo-Saxon as well as partly Celtic, so I cross both. So we were just explaining the Druid thing in detail, and that was fun. But the Norse one is interesting too. I've travelled in Scandinavia. I've been to Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and obviously when I was studying ancient history, I was interested in what was the religion of these people before they became Christian. They had their own traditions, which were very ancient. And I discovered they're mostly bound up with what we call the runes. Now, I was never taught about runes at school. I became later a religious studies teacher, and I always taught my kids about them, but my teachers never did. They just made you read bits of the Bible, but never explained it. So the runes are really interesting, as I discovered. And a priest in the Anglo-Saxon or Norse traditions, or Germanic, was a rune teacher. Rune is an old word meaning a secret or a mystery. And so it was handed down verbally, orally, to be a rune master. And basically it's an alphabet of shapes which represent the sounds. And it was believed to be discovered by the chief god, Odin. Odin is the god of wisdom. He's the intellectual among the gods, if you want. Thor was the guy that got stuff done, powerful, if you need a house fixing, call Thor. But if you need to design the thing, get Odin. He was the intellectual, and he found the runes through a process of introspection and internal, spiritual journey, if you want. The legend says he hung upside down on a tree for 9 days and nights before he found the runes. And some people say that's a metaphor for 9 months of pregnancy. All of us hang upside down in the womb, before we come to this realm of being. So we're all like Odin, and we all find the runes. So I've written a book about the Kabbalah runes, which
Yes, I see.
is somewhere in this house. I think it's over here, actually. I found it.
There.
So these are the shapes of some of the runes. They're quite angular. Now, so basically the way it works is, it's a bit like the I Ching or something. It's a form of seership. So the life is divided into certain types of events. Most of us fall in love, most of us have to deal with death, most of us have to deal with suffering, disappointment, also joy. There are certain archetypal events that happen in all our lives, from birth to death. And so the runes are a guide, a map, what's going on in your life at the moment. And so what you do is you do a reading. You normally take 3 or 5 runes or something, and then the rune teacher will help you discern the pattern of your weird. Now the word weird is the Anglo-Saxon word for fate or destiny. It's the equivalent to what Buddhists call karma. So all of us have certain karma that we're feeding all the time, you know. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. And what we have to do is to learn how to feed the good so that our karma becomes pure and for the benefit of all beings, you know. And that's the point of the runes, is by discerning the weird, you can see which direction not to go in and which direction to go in. You know, should I go and live in Japan? Says Noah. You know, well, we could do a rune reading on that, right? Etc. So that's how the runes. Now we know the names of some of these ancient rune teachers, although most of them are unknown. You know, there was a chap called Siemund the Wise, who wrote the Poetic Edda, which was writing down the stories of the gods, how we know about Thor and Odin and the goddesses and all the rest of them. Amazing stories that were written down in Iceland, and then also in Sweden and places. One of my heroes is a man called Boreas, who was the librarian to Queen Christina in Sweden when she was Queen of Sweden, and she actually converted to Catholicism and renounced the throne, moved to Rome in the 1600s. But Boreas was her librarian teacher, her seer, and he was speculating. I mean, they knew about Jewish mysticism called the Kabbalah, and Boreas is one of the few people I've ever come across who said maybe the runes go back to an ancient common source with the Jewish mystics, the Kabbalah, because that says the same, that each letter of the Hebrew alphabet is a sacred sound, and God creates the world through the sounds. So, you know, is it not possible that they go back to a common source? Now, Boreas said that in the 1600s and wrote a book about it. But people forgot, you know. Anyway, I came now and I wrote this book, which is saying the same thing, which I spent 2 years writing at the castle in Scotland where I lived. And I think I've more or less proved that the Hamitic-Semitic languages, that's Arabic, Hebrew, ancient Egyptian, Phoenician, Babylonian, go back to the same root as the Indo-European languages, which is like German, you know, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit. And I reckon that the tribal ancestors of all these people had a common wisdom, which has come down as the runes and the Kabbalah, both. And this is the scattering of Babel. We think we're all different tribes, but actually we're one humanity. And there's one wisdom at the heart of it all. I believe, if you actually read the Kabbalah properly, and then you read what Jesus was trying to do, I think he was speaking from the same place. He had this universal approach, and he was saying we should love each other and not kill each other, you know. So there's a whole tradition called Christian Kabbalah, and that's where Boreas was coming from as well. And there's some brilliant, you know. So anyway, it's in this book. It's interesting stuff. And if you ever want a rune reading, just come and ask me. We can do it takes an hour or so. And I've got different sets of runes. Some of them are handmade in the castle in Scotland on wood with different letter shapes. So Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, was very interested in the runes, and they come into the plot of The Lord of the Rings. He was a professor of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University, so you know, if he was sitting here, he'd want to join the discussion. He's a learned man. Jung also knew about all this and was interested. Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst. And he would have said the runes represent different archetypes, you know. So it's very similar to the Druids, actually. And I've been blessed in my life to study both, you know, both of these systems. And when I lived in Wales, I was right on the frontier of the Anglo-Saxon area called England and the Welsh area. And for 1,000 years they used to fight each other, the Welsh and the English, the Celts versus the Anglo-Saxons. But then they eventually settled down and made peace and started learning each other's languages. And I wrote an encyclopedia of the Welsh marches, exploring how that happened and how, because I think at its best the runic tradition is also about peace, you know, as well as the Druid tradition. Okay, any questions, comments? Yes.
Well, just a joke. They invented the rugby so they could make war in playground.
Yeah, in effect, sport.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely, yes. And I've actually invented something called Druid football,
Oh yeah, I remember now.
which is one of the 99 names of peace in my book about to be published. I'm not going to spoil the exciting, but it's got a new rule, Druid football, unlike current rules. But yes, sport is much more fun because you don't kill each other. You can then get up and play again. I mean, when I was a little boy growing up in Brighton, we used to do shooting games, so you'd shoot each other and die, but then you'd get up and have another round. And that, I think, you know, it's like, but if you actually kill each other, it's the end of the game, and that's boring. So, playing is very important. Yeah. Yeah, they call it Asatru, the religion of the Norse people now. I know people that are, you know, priests and priestesses in this, that the Asatru, Osa is the name of the gods, Tru is being true to the gods. And they have official recognition in Iceland and other Scandinavian countries. In Iceland, it's very interesting because when Christianity first came to Iceland, some of the people who were pagans saw it as very divisive. These guys were going around saying, you've got to believe in Jesus or you're going to hell. And by the way, hell was the pagan word for the underworld. Didn't have negative connotations, just it's where you go when you die, right? And Hela is the goddess who conceals and covers. So they passed a law in Iceland, the first one in history, of interfaith toleration. So you can be a good Icelander whether you're a Christian or a pagan. And you aren't allowed to attack each other and call each other names. And they passed that in the Althing in Iceland in about 1000 AD, and it's still on the statute book. So they've had their official rights. And they also call, this time they call Yule in the Norse religion. They don't use the term Christmas, they call it Yule, which is connected to the rune Yira, which is this rune here, which stands for time, and it's the same root as the year. Yira is, if you think of that as revolving,
Hi.
that's what we're doing. We're on a revolving wheel of time. And so Yule is when we celebrate, you know, the rebirth of the light. The wheel turns, thank God. So that's very auspicious.
Nice.
Yes, okay, that's the Kabbalah runes. Any questions about the runes or the Norse gods?
What is the question you would like to hear?
Well, tell me, you two are from Holland. Have you ever studied these things before? Ancient Dutch spirituality, is that